Okay, we are ready to begin. So the on the previous Gemara, so I mentioned, and I think it's important to emphasize that there is a big discussion in the commentaries about the shaking of the lulav. And the shaking of the lulav, the there is one understanding of it that you're actually shaking the lulav. The other understanding is you're just waving it into different directions. So I mentioned this yesterday. I just want to make sure that it's clear that there is discussion that it could be that you don't really have to shake it. You just have to wave it into the three directions and then into the other three directions, or you have to actually give a shake. And I mentioned that it is interesting that especially with our the minhag in Lubavitch is to have a very tight lulav. At the same time, there seems to be a minhag after you wave it in the direction, you give a little shake. So the understanding seems to be that even though it's very tight, the lulav is like the custom was to buy a tight custom is to buy a tight lulav, but we assume that that little shake that you do
Based on
is going to be yaitza. It's good enough.
one of your
It,
colleagues, and I wanted to
it will
speak.
fulfill. Let me mute everyone. It'll fulfill the mitzvah of the waving. So we seem to do both, at least from my understanding. That in Babich we do wave it three times, but we also each time that we wave it and we shake it, we do give a little shuckle. But again, it is a topic of discussion. Do you need to give the actual shuckle to the lulav, or is it more just waving it in the different directions, to and fro, and so on? And it involves it involves really something that we don't have written clearly here, but it's based on a Yerushalmi that talks about the wavings, and it talks about the three times. Well, our Gemara doesn't mention three times, so does that mean you have to shake it three times, or does it mean each time that you wave it and go back and forth, each time you give one shake, so altogether it ends up being three. So that is how it ties in over here. We're talking about the wavings, and the Gemara Yerushalmi talks about the wavings of the that it has to be done three times, and so on. And the question that the Yerushalmi asks, so it could be understood to mean an actual shaking. So anyway, that is a discussion in the commentaries. Um,
Rabbi,
yes.
there's a very interesting note here. It says
Okay.
the first one is from the Ran and the Rashba. It says
Right.
practically speaking, some say that it's sufficient to wave the lulav to and fro and in two directions as well as up and down. They added that one who waves the lulav to and fro in four directions is suspected of heresy. Others say, and this is from the Rosh, others say that on the contrary, one must make certain to wave the lulav to and fro in all four directions, as then it does not appear that he's forming a cross, because the four directions plus the up and down total six sides. That's from the Rosh. That's the
Right.
common
Right.
practice in recent generations.
Right. Right. So it is mentioned in as you just wrote that there is a statement there that says that some were nervous to do it in four directions because it looked like a cross, lahavdil, of course. But um, okay. Thank you for mentioning that. I do also want to mention that there is a little source to the actual shaking of the lulav rather than just moving it in different directions. And that is that it says that you need to have an extra hand breadth of length to the lulav over the other species. And the reason being is in order to shake it. And so it definitely sounds like there has to be an actual what's called kiskus, some type of the leaves rustling. Uh, so that is one of the sources that they use to say that you have to actually shake the lulav and not just wave it in different directions, but actually should should shake. Okay. Anyway, so that was a discussion, and of course, I'm not familiar with each of them in Huggim. I don't know if everyone is makbid to do, but I think the shaking is a commonly accepted thing, that we actually shake it, not just wave it. Even amongst other traditions, although I don't know. Sephardic people, do they also give a good shake, or is it just waving it in different directions? Anyone know? Okay, it's not.
I
Ezra?
think yeah, I think that it's that they do the shaking.
They give a shake also, not just waving it. Okay, yeah. So it seems like that became acceptable. That became the common tradition in all, according to all. Okay, now the other thing I wanted to mention is that Tysus over here, the Gemara had mentioned that there's a difference between Daraisa. Maybe there's a difference between Daraisa and Rabbanon. That for a biblical obligation, then you would have to interrupt your meal. But a rabbinic obligation, you wouldn't have to. That's what the Gemara at least understood. Could be a difference, to differentiate, make there be no contradiction. And Tosfos is bothered with the fact that if a person were to have a meal on Friday afternoon, and Shabbos comes in, according to at least the way Tosfos understands the halacha to be, is that you do not have to interrupt for Kiddush. Interestingly enough, very applicable for this week, because there are some that are going to do something called Piras Mappa Umakadish. That way, that they actually make Kiddush while they're in the middle of their Purim meal. If they start their meal later on in the afternoon, they could just extend it into Shabbos. This is seems to be an option. It's not the ideal, maybe. A lot of Rabbanim encourage you to have the meal before Chatzos or before the 10th hour in the day. Different opinions as to when you should ideally have the Purim Suda. But let's say you started your meal later in the day. Let's say you did start it, or it's extending, and it's still the Purim meal, and it's time for Kiddush. So Tosfos over here says that according to halacha, you don't have to interrupt and make Kiddush. You could actually continue your meal and later make Kiddush. And Tosfos is bothered with the fact that seemingly there's a mitzvah d'oraisa to make Kiddush. And so how do you deal with that mitzvah d'oraisa to make Kiddush, that biblical obligation to make Kiddush, if you're supposed to interrupt for any biblical obligation? So that's what bothers Tosfos here. And Tosfos answers that Kiddush, we're not afraid you're going to forget, because you could even do the night Kiddush the next day as well. So it's not like as much of a concern as we have with lulav, that once the night comes, it's over. Here, the Kiddush at night, the main issue of eating is that we are concerned that you will be negligent and ultimately miss out on Kiddush. And so that's Tosfos' first answer. Tosfos' second answer is that since you're involved in a Shabbos meal, because you're continuing to eat at night, so we're not worried that you're going to be masatzel in Kiddush. We're not worried that you'll be lazy and forget about Kiddush. You're involved in a Shabbos meal. It's not like in a case of lulav where you're eating a meal and you didn't shake lulav. Here, your meal is a Shabbos meal. We're not afraid that you won't sanctify the day of Shabbos. This is all about sanctifying the day. Kiddush is sanctifying the day of Shabbos. So we're not afraid And therefore, according to the letter of the law, you could continue eating your meal even before reciting. And this is not only talking about Kiddush on wine, it's Kiddush even in the davening Kiddush. So the biblical obligation of reciting Kiddush, Tais is talking about, that you have a biblical obligation, even if you want to say the wine, which Tais seems to understand that the wine element of Kiddush is rabbinic, but the actual wording of the davening of Kiddush, the bracha of Kiddush, even if it's said on wine or if it's said in the davening, that would be biblical, that you could theoretically push off and continue eating, because we're not worried that you'll be mesatzel, that you will be lazy with the Kiddush of the Hayyim. For his second reason is because you're involved in a Suda Shabbos and a Shabbos meal. Taisus has another issue when it comes to the next statement of the Gemara, where the Gemara mentions that there's a difference between Yom Tov Rishon and Yom Tov Sheni. That the days after the first day, at least in Israel or outside of Israel, the days after the second day are called Yom Tov Sheni D'Rabban, are rabbinic. And the Taisus is wondering. He says in the case of mincha, the Gemara there that talks about interrupting your meal for mincha, it mentions that for Ma'ariv we're not afraid. Mincha is where we're concerned. I'm sorry, just the opposite. Mincha. What did our Gemara say? Our Gemara said that for lulav you have to interrupt the meal, and mincha you don't have to interrupt. That was what the Gemara's kasha. The Gemara says hischilu ein mafsikin. If you started eating, you don't have to interrupt. That was the Gemara's kasha, right? So mincha you don't have to interrupt. So the Gemara in Bracha says that for Ma'ariv you do have to interrupt. For Ma'ariv you have to interrupt your meal. For mincha you don't have to interrupt your meal. For Ma'ariv you do have to interrupt your meal. So Taisus is thinking, well, let's take that and apply it to the laws of lulav. What's the difference between mincha and Ma'ariv? Mincha, you know why you don't have to interrupt? You have to interrupt because you're mereses, you're afraid that you're going to miss the time for mincha because it's limited. How much time is there for mincha? Not a full day. You don't have a full 12 hours. What do you have for mincha? You're very limited. You have from chatzos, after chatzos until shkia or tzeis, you have a half a day, and that's about it. And because of that, we're not afraid that you're going to neglect davening mincha. But for Ma'ariv, what happens? Ma'ariv, you have a whole night. So because you have a whole night, that's why we're not afraid. So Taisus says that maybe you could say the same thing as with lulav. That's what that by Ma'ariv, you're not afraid that you're going to neglect Ma'ariv, because you're not afraid because you have so much time. Therefore, we are afraid you're going to neglect it. In other words, because you're not so concerned by Ma'ariv, so the Gemara over there understands that Ma'ariv you would be allowed, but that from Ma'ariv you would have to interrupt your meal to daven Ma'ariv. Why? Because from Ma'ariv you are not going to from Ma'ariv, if you're in the middle of eating a meal and the time of Ma'ariv comes, you have all night to say Ma'ariv, and therefore you're gonna maybe neglect it because you have all night. Therefore, the rabbi said for Ma'ariv you have to interrupt. You have to interrupt for Ma'ariv. So Taisus says maybe that's the same reason for lulav. You have to interrupt your meal. You're in the middle of eating a meal, and time for lulav comes. Interrupt the meal. You got to interrupt it. Why? Because you got all day. You have all day. You might end up neglecting it. You'll neglect it. The rabbi said no, you got to interrupt your. You have to interrupt your meal. So couldn't that be another answer? Again, our Gemara gave an answer that there's a difference between if you have shahos bayom, if you have time during the day, that you still haven't, if there's time in the day that you haven't shaken the lulav, but you still have time left, then you would be okay with continuing your meal. But the Mishnah that says that you have to interrupt your meal, that's talking about that you're close to the end of the day. And then if it's very close to the end of the day, then you got to interrupt your meal. That's the way our Gemara answered. And the same thing would apply to mincha. The case where it says by mincha that mincha, you don't have to interrupt somehow because you have more time in the day. You still have time left. It's not so late. It's not shkia yet. You have a little time. Okay, you don't have to interrupt. The rabbis didn't obligate you to interrupt. That was the way our Gemara answered the contradiction. Toshis is bothered with the fact that the case of mincha, there is a differentiation between mincha and ma'ariv there. That same differentiation maybe applies to lulav as well. And why didn't the Gemara answer that way? The same difference that you have mincha ma'ariv, you have mincha and lulav. What was the difference between mincha and ma'ariv? Mincha, the Gemara there says, or the Mishnah says that you don't have to interrupt. You can continue eating. But ma'ariv, you do have to interrupt. And what's the difference? Because ma'ariv, you've got all night to say. Mincha, you only have a short time. Mincha, we're not afraid you're going to neglect. Why? Because you know you're very limited with time. You're going to make sure to say it. Ma'ariv, you feel like you have a lot of extra time. And therefore, ma'ariv, you're not going to be so careful about it. You're going to neglect it. The rabbi said, therefore, ma'ariv, you are not allowed to continue eating your meal. You got to stop your meal because you might neglect ma'ariv. Mincha, we're not afraid you're going to neglect. Ma'ariv, you might neglect it because you got all night, so you'll push it off, just like everyone loves to procrastinate and push things off till the last minute. So there, we're going to say, no. There, we tell you, you have to interrupt. So the same thing as lulav. Lulav, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to keep, you'll push it off. You have all day to say, to do lulav. Mincha is different. So why don't we say the same thing, Tosis asks. Seems like a strong question. But Tosis answers that answer works. That explanation is a good explanation for davening. Davening takes time. Because davening takes time, therefore, there's reason to say that you have to stop davening and stop eating and make sure to daven ma'ariv now. But when it comes to lulav is you simply pick it up and you already fulfilled the mitzvah. It's not a time. It really doesn't take time. Tosis says, therefore, there wouldn't be a reason that the rabbis, that wouldn't be enough of a reason for the rabbis to tell you to interrupt your meal. It's a very easy thing. Something that's hard is what you push off. Where do you procrastinate? When something takes time. When something is a 1 second thing, it takes 1 second, that you're not going to procrastinate. That would not be a reason why the rabbis would tell you, oh, you got all day for lulav. Now you got to stop your meal because of that we're not afraid about. That takes 1 second. You lift up the lulav. And therefore, the Gemara doesn't answer that question. Okay. And then the other Tosis we spoke about yesterday was the fact that the Gemara uses the terminology in the Mishnah as a source that we're dealing with a situation where it must be that it's chol hamoyed. That were the case of the Mishnah where you didn't shake lulav yet. You came home and you didn't shake lulav. Must be talking about that it's chol hamoyed. It's not Yom Tov. Why? Because it says Baba Debisha Baba Derech. He's Baba Derech. He's coming on the way, and he's coming on the way. Where are you coming from? Oh, you're traveling. It's Yom Tov. This is must be that you're coming from a long way. You're coming. You must be Chol Hamoed. not going to travel on Yom Tov. There's Isser Tchum, the prohibition of going too far on Yom Tov, and so on. It must be, the Gemara says this is a diuk, it's dekonami, it's meduyuk this way. And Taisus, of course, asks, he says, the problem is that the Gemara in Brachas gives these examples, and it mentions that concept of you got up early to go on your way, a similar terminology, maybe not exactly the same, but very similar. And it talks about blowing shofar. You go up, you're going on you're going to be traveling, and you gotta blow shofar. You want to blow shofar before sunrise. So he uses the same terminology.
I'm sorry, you said go too far. Is there a tchum on Chol Hamoed?
No. This is the question. Are we talking about Yom Tov or are we talking about Chol Hamoed? If it's Chol Hamoed, it's no problem. If it's Yom Tov, that's a problem. So that's what we're dealing with. Taisa says, but think about the case in Brachas. The case in Brachas talks about traveling, that you're going to be traveling. It's before sunrise. It's before Netzach Hama, before sunrise, but it's after dawn. And you want to blow shofar. It talks about a few things. Shofar, lulav, Megillah. What does it say? You're allowed to. And he uses the same term. You're going, a similar term. Babadarach, you're going to be traveling. So how can our Gemara use this as a proof that it's Chol Hamoed if a similar terminology is used in Brachas, and it must be talking about Yom Tov there, because it's about blowing shofar. Blowing shofar is only on Rosh Hashanah, according to Halacha. There's no other mitzvah of blowing shofar. Of course, we have a tradition, a minhag to blow shofar in Elul, but that's not what it's talking about there. It's talking about the mitzvah of blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah. That means that it uses such a term even when we're talking about on Yom Tov. What does it mean? It obviously means somewhere in the Tchum that you're traveling. But how does our Gemara say, oh, it must mean that it's Chol Hamoed if the Gemara uses a similar term in Brachas, and it definitely means Yom Tov. So Taisus, the answer is that where we know it has to be talking about a short trip, then it's no problem. The case in Brachas, it's going to mention that it could use such a term, because we know, obviously, it's Yom Tov, you're not going to take a long trip. So it uses such a term because that's obviously what it means. You're walking within the Tchum. You're going to travel. Yeah, you're traveling, but a short travel. You're within the Tchum. You did Erev Tchumen. You did whatever. Yeah, it's a big city. So you're walking. You're going to be traveling, but it's within the Tchum. Here in Florida, you go 1 mile. It's already like a long travel. It's hot out. This is so there in the Tchum. Your Baba, your Yotzel Adar. You're going to be going. So therefore, there. The Gemara could the statement that is brought down in Brachas could easily be talking about on Yom Tov, and it's not surprising that it's talking about shofar, and it uses that such a terminology because we obviously know that that's what it means. But here, where it could mean both, that's when the Gemara says it must mean Chol Hamoed. There, we have to say it means Yom Tov. So therefore, I didn't mind to use that terminology. Here, we could mean either one. Why did it pick a term? Misha Baba Derech. If it could mean Yom Tov, don't. If it might mean Chol Hamoed, it might mean Yom Tov. Don't pick such a term if you want it to mean Yom Tov. Pick a term that would apply to Yom Tov. The fact that here it could mean either one, and it chooses to say Baba Derech, it must mean Chol Hamoed. That's why the Gemara considers it a proof. And the next thing Tosis says is that when it talks about going somewhere, the understanding would be that maybe you're going to the Chacham, you're going to hear a shir, but and you want to take the lulav, do the lulav before you go out. Here it says Babadach, you're coming from some trip, so it sounds like. This is a much further. Your Baba Derech, you're coming from a travel, and you're gonna arrive in your house, and you still haven't shaken the lulav. It sounds like you must have come from a faraway place. Why didn't you shake it before you left? So it must be that it was a faraway place, and therefore there's implication that the implication is that you've been out all day. You've been traveling all day. So in other words, it sounds like it's more of a travel. When it says to go somewhere, that could be talking about you're just leaving early in the morning. It doesn't say where you're going, but you want to shake before you leave. Maybe you're going to a shear, something. But to return and you still haven't shaken lulav, that sounds like you must have been on a long journey. So that's the other understanding of the Gemara of why Baba Derech here. That's the understanding of Taisus why when the Gemara understands Baba Derech to mean that it was that it must be Cholamayit, must be the intermediate days. Okay, now we have the next Mishnah which we started. Let's start again from the Mishnah. We're on the second Mishnah on page 38a. The Mishnah on 38a, about 10 lines up from the bottom of the page. Misha haya eved or isha or katan makrinas. If a person had an eved isha or katan reading to him the halal. So Rashi mentions here that normally someone could be mitzi you, fulfill the obligation for you by them reciting all the words, and you're somehow answering some type of an amen or a hallelujah. That's a common way to be yotze, to fulfill the obligation. But that only works the person who's reading to you is themselves obligated in this mitzvah. Here we've got a case of an eved, a person who's a non-Jewish slave, although they might have gone to mikvah already, and they might have, and they're left their goyish ways, but if they get freed, their conversion to Judaism will be completed. But until they are freed, they're called an eved Kanani, and they are obligated in mitzvahs like women, not like men. They don't have the regular obligations of men for mitzvahs. That's an eved Kanani. An isha, a woman, is of course exempt from all positive mitzvahs, almost all positive mitzvahs, including lulav. Lulav would be a positive mitzvah, woman would be exempt from. Of course, in today's day and age, many women shake lulav and they listen to the shofar on Rosh Hashanah and so on, to the extent that some poskim even say that it's become an obligation for women in today's day and age because they've accepted it on themselves as if it's an obligation. But in essence, women are exempt and from shofar and from lulav and from eating in the sukkah. So all of these are positive mitzvahs. Now, so what happens if you have a woman, an eved, or a katan? And of course, a katan is exempt from mitzvahs. And what if they are going to be saying the halal for you? We can understand it in today's day and age also, where you have children, you send them to a good yeshiva. You yourself were not able to go to yeshiva and, being brought up in the earlier years when there was hardly any yeshivas around. And parents had no money to pay for yeshiva. Today, so what do? You send your kids to yeshiva, so they know halal, but you don't. So what would a person do? So he has an eved isha or a katan. The child is going to say halal for you. So so it says if you have an eved isha or katan makrinoisai reading to you for you the halal, you should answer after them each word that they say. So you can't read Hebrew. They read Hebrew. So what you say is you read after them each word that they say. They can't be mitzi you, but they could help you say the words because they're saying the words and you repeat after them the words. So are you fulfilling the obligation because they are saying it? No, you're fulfilling the obligation by you saying it. Happens to be you can't read, so you're hearing it from your son who knows how to read, and you're going to recite it after him word for word, and that works. You recite after them what they're saying, and that will work. Interestingly, the Mishnah says, but a curse should come to this person because he didn't learn. He should make sure to try to learn, and so it's considered like something negative. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, when originally from Philadelphia, and there was the Federation Jewish newspaper. They're the Jewish exponent. There was this woman who had a weekly column, and I remember one week she started out by saying, "Last Friday, my husband said, 'Honey, why don't you make Kiddush tonight?'" That's what this reminds me of.
Right, gotcha. Okay, so so this is the story that if a person is in this situation, they are exempt from reciting Hallel, but you could say word for word after them. Now, it does say, and even in the case where, let's say, you do know how to recite Hallel, and you're still asking them to say it, it is an embarrassment that they are like the shluchim. They're going to be your emissary to recite it and for you. So that's the meaning of tavoy loy me'era. Some type of curse will should come on such a person. Now,
very interestingly, not considering a blind person.
That it doesn't mention a blind person.
Right.
What do you think? Why?
I think that first of all, they don't take up all the cases all at once necessarily, but I think that there are general rules that person would be exempt.
There are general rules that what?
Rules that a blind person would be exempt.
Right. So that's why it should mention it. And it could also mention a cherish and shaita. So a cherish it can't really mention. You know why? Because the cherish that the Chachamim talk about with a deaf person is deaf and mute.
Yes.
So you can't really say the words to you. Have you in mind? But shaita is another reason why he probably doesn't mention a shaita, because he probably can't say Hallel. He's such a meshugana, he's unable to say Hallel. But a blind person, I think, is a topic of discussion. The Gemara talks about it that in the time of the Gemara there was like a shaila is a summa chayev b'chol mitzvahs. I think it's I guess it's the Tanoim that argue about it, right? The summa is obligated, so it doesn't get into that here. It's not getting into that discussion. Okay, anyway, so the Mishnah continues and says that im haya gadol makra oisai, if there's a adult, meaning a man adult who's reading the Hallel, oina achrav halaluka. You answer after the adult halaluka. Now Rashi mentions over here that there's a discussion in Tractate Saita where it talks about how the Yidden, when they, during Kriyas Yamsuf, how did they say the Shira? And the Gemara there has a machlokes. It's really a debate among the rabbis, how exactly they sang the praise at the sea. And one of them says it's like a gadol makra as a Hallel, our case, like an adult recites Hallel for the others. How does the adult recite Hallel for other people? So it says over there, they would answer Hallelujah. They would answer afterwards Hallelujah. What's the case? Moshe said Ashir al Hashem. In other words, by Hallel, what do? After the people say, when you say Hallel, when the Chazan says the Hallel for the people, so the people answer Hallelujah. So similar to that is how they did the Shira, the song at Kriyas Yamsuf at the splitting of the sea. It was similar to Hallel. Did they say Hallelujah in the splitting of the sea? No, but it was similar style. What does it mean? Because Moshe said Ashir Lashem, and they answered Ashir Lashem. Then Moshe said Kiga Iga, and what did they answer? Ashir Lashem. Each time they said each time Moshe said a sentence, they said Ashir Lashem. And here, when it says Oina Achar of Hallelujah, it means that you would say after each of the sentences or half sentences, statements in the Hallel, everyone says Hallelujah. So that's what the Rashi uses that as an understanding that here also it means not just one time Hallelujah at the end, but on each thing that the adult is reciting in the Hallel, you would say Hallelujah. Now, I should mention, we're going to see in the Gemara that really there's a concept of Shemea Ka'ina. If someone says it, you fulfill your obligation. And because you fulfill your obligation, when the adult recites the Hallel, you really don't have to answer anything. But the Chachamim were masakin that you should say Hallelujah. It should be in a way of Shira and Simcha. It should be done in a way of joy and rejoicing, and that's the understanding, at least according to some commentaries. There's discussion like, are you Yitzchok? You don't say Hallelujah. In other words, you heard
Hallelujah is like an Amen.
It's almost like an Amen, but it's even more. It's with Simcha and Shira, so on. You're praising Hashem extra. Okay. Now the Mishnah continues and it says Makam Shanogo Likfol, a place where they have a custom to double the psukim. So Yikbal, you should double the psukim. You should say them double. There's such a minhagim. And
wait, isn't that like Hodu Hashem? We say it twice.
Yeah, but what they're saying is that because Hallel has psukim that are doubled, like Hodu Hashem is said a second time, and the pasuk of Yomarna is like Yomruna, and Min HaMeitzar Anani B'Merchavka Hashem La'ira. There's a lot of psukim that are like doubled. Svavuni, Tev Lachs B'Hashem, like it's repetitious. There's a lot of repetitious psukim. If you want, let's see Rashi. Rashi says Likbol. Every pasuk where there's a minute to double every pasuk and pasuk. Why? Because there's paragraphs there. There's a paragraph there that's all doubled. So we learn from that paragraph that the whole Hallel should be doubled. Hashem li, toiv lachsis, svavuni, dachi sani, vayhili lishua, korina vishua, yimin Hashem, lo yomos v'lamavos leina sanoni, piskuli shari tzedek zeh shar l'Hashem. Everything is doubled in that paragraph of Hallel. And then Rashi says, but from Oidcha and onward, there's you don't double anything. And that's what the Gemara says. There, you add to double, but that's not what we're talking about here. Here, we're talking about the earlier Hallel, that because there's a paragraph that's doubled, so you would end up doubling the whole thing in such a place. In a makam that the minhag is to double, you double. Lifshite, how about a place where the minhag is to not double it? Yivshite, you do it straight, without flat, without doubling. Levarech, yivarech, a place where there's a minhag to say a bracha after the Hallel. which is like we say Yahalalucha and we say a bracha at the end. So Yavarech, you should say that bracha. If that's the minhag of the place. Hakol kaminhag hamadina, everything is like the minhag of the place. That's what you should do. And
Rabbi.
Yeah.
The minhag edot hamizrach, if you're doing the half halal, is not to say the last
bracha. Did they say the first bracha by half halal?
No.
Only
No.
the
Okay.
What they'll do is, for example, if they have an Ashkenaz there, they'll have him say the bracha. But
the Shabbos guy, the halal guy, the Ashkenaz,
right.
the halal guy.
Yoisvarf.
They follow the
right.
The Shon Tzion basically said not.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Is the whole shaila about the half halal. I think the Rambam holds you don't say a bracha on it, so they're following that. But they want to be machmir just in case. You should say a bracha. So if there's someone there that could say the bracha, they have him say the bracha. Right. The interesting thing is
about the last part.
Okay. Yeah.
Their minhag is not to say the last paragraph.
Okay.
That has a bracha also. That's the last bracha.
Right, but they don't say it.
Right.
But is there a minhag in which you say that paragraph, but you don't say the bracha?
Oh, I don't think so. I think the paragraph and the bracha probably go together. It's probably I don't know. I'm not familiar with anyone who says the paragraph. Although there used to be a minhag in Lubavitch not to say the bracha, let the chazan say the bracha. So the chazan was always the Shabbos guy in Lubavitch. And the truth is that minhag maybe you would say Yahalalucha like you're saying, Ezra, and the chazan would say the bracha at the end as well, and you would say Amen to the chazan. And this was in order to be machmir like the Rambam. But the minhag changed in Lubavitch with of course, with the guidance of the Rebbeim that the minhag had changed, and they all say the bracha now. So you don't really have this. It doesn't apply really anymore. But I guess the minhag used to be, as you're saying, Ezra, that they would actually say Hallelujah, but they would skip the bracha and they would have the chazan say the bracha. Yes, Jeffrey.
I'm pretty sure that if you look at different Haggadahs for Pesach night, you'll see the differences, and some don't have the bracha. Took me many years to
Pesach.
Yeah, at night at the Seder.
In the Haggadah.
Yeah. So it took me many years to realize that different Haggadahs have different arrangements, and I didn't know when I was a young fellow to go look for the one that I was used to saying. You go to somebody's house and they use their Haggadah.
Right. Interesting. So I wonder if that means, Ezra, do you say the bracha at the end in the Haggadah?
It's the full halal.
It's the full halal. Yeah, I don't see why not. That's interesting that you're saying that that some people don't say that bracha. That's news to me. But okay, I believe you.
It's also more complicated because some people say the whole Hallel at night in the synagogue also before they go home.
Right, but that's also the whole Hallel.
Yes. So
that those are not cases where people skimp on the bracha. You know what I mean? The where people are nervous to say a bracha is when it's a half Hallel. But the whole Hallel.
I think that if you look at Haggadahs, that you'll see differences.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know which group which comes from, or if it was an error. It could be that they copied them from old Haggadahs, whatever, and they missed a page, or the page fell out.
Right.
So I'm still interested in this. We know in our times we had people who are adults that were not able to study because the government did not allow them to, and we had thousands of Soviet Jews come, and they had no books, they weren't allowed to have Hebrew books anymore. And if their neighbors saw they had a Hebrew book, that they would report them to the secret police. So this was a case where people would have been glad to study, but they couldn't. And so I don't think that Vitavo, Lo, Era, whatever, applied in those situations. And there were people that had to say by repeating for after someone else.
This is the thing. I'm sorry, I missed what you said at the end. In the Hallel in the Haggadah, I'm just pulling it up here. The bracha at the end is really the bracha of Yeshtabach.
Yes.
Is that what you're referring to? That some people skip Yeshtabach?
I think that
in other words, we do say the Yahalalucha, but we don't say Baruch Atah Hashem. Melech Mahulal Batishbachis, right? So we don't say that, and I don't know if anyone does. We say the Nishmas, and we continue on to other stuff, and we say. So I'm not sure. Are you saying that some people actually say the Melech Mahulal Batishbachis bracha? Some people say that bracha, or even the Yishtabach. You're saying that's.
Yes, I think there are differences in different Haggadahs. And because it's so much is added there, it's not clear where the end of the version of the Hallel is. Yes, correct. I never heard anybody discuss it. I only saw that it seemed to be differences in different Haggadahs.
Right. Well, thank you for bringing that up. But definitely like to see if anyone skips out Yishtabach in that bracha, because basically that bracha is very similar to the end of Hallel. It's Melech Mahulal Batishbachis is the end of Hallel, and the end of Yishtabach is Kel Melech Gadol Mahul Batishbachis.
Right.
Basically,
So I found it was very confusing when I first saw that.
Right.
I think it wasn't often that we went to somebody else's house for Pesach, so you use what you had. They bought, for example, I went shopping with my father before Pesach, and they had like a remainder, a child's version of a Haggadah. It was very nice because it had more instructions. Both of them don't have any instructions. Which matzah should you hold when you say the brach? Which matzah should you break to give to taste for everybody? Right. And that had more instructions. I said, Dad, you could look from over here. This is really interesting. Okay. But there were other differences.
I'll tell you, we're very lucky because first of all, in today's day and age, you have all the Haggadahs have all the rules and all the instructions. In today's day and age, not 50 years ago, not 30 years ago even, but today's day you have 500 new Haggadahs. But in addition to that, we also are very lucky here outside of Israel that we actually remember some of the Haggadah because we have it 2 days in a row. In Israel, imagine you don't really remember from year to year. Here, at least you have it 2 days in a row, so it does make it a little easier, especially if the night before you said the bracha, and now you're at someone else's house and they have a different Haggadah. Where's the bracha? It probably happened. That's how you probably recognized it.
I believe that's true, but I was very young, so. I just thought maybe I did something wrong at first.
Right.
It's very hard because when you're small, nobody used to go over things with you. One of the things I was most medactic about was that I would prepare my children beforehand, not just before conscious, but to prepare them what they should expect and what to go over. Okay, I was very medactic because the first Seder I remember, they asked me to read. They asked me to read English, and nobody prepared me, and I didn't understand how it fit in, and nobody explained anything. Nothing, absolutely nothing. And they had these very small print. They had the Maxwell House. Nobody went to the store to buy a nice Haggadah. Okay.
Anyway, I got to finish. I wanted to go a little further.
Yeah,
but nice to hear your story. Ezra, you were looking it up. Did you? What's in your Haggadah? You have the Yishtabach bracha, probably, right?
Well, right before the fourth kos is Yehalelucha, and it does have the bracha at the end.
Without Yishtabach, besides for Yishtabach?
With the, well, it has it. Yeah, it has the bracha there.
Uh-huh. So you have two brachas at the end. Melech Muhulal Batishbachos, and then you do the Nishmas afterwards and the Yishtabach afterwards.
Yeah, Nishmat Kol Chai. Let's see.
So you have Yehalelucha, and it ends with a bracha, Melech Muhulal Batishbachos, and then you have Hoidu Lashem Kitov Kilel Chastoi.
Let's see. Okay, so I'm looking at the Ben Ish Chai because that's the one that
Okay.
I normally use.
Yeah.
Okay, so it
Halalucha.
Baruch haba b'shem Hashem. Okay, it goes all the way down. Ki olam hasdo. There's no bracha there. Then we begin with
okay.
Hodu Hashem ki tov, and go all the way through to Nishmat Kol Chai. And then when we get to Yalucha, which is the that's where the Baruch Ata Hashem Melech Me'ulal Batishpachot, and then after that we have the fourth course.
Aha. So you don't have Yishtabach then.
What do you mean Yishtabach?
You don't say V'chein Yishtabach Shem Cholad Malkeinu. You basically put the Yehalelucha at the end of all these additions to the Hallel. In other words, you have the Hoidu Lashem Kitov Kili Olam Chasto, Hoidu Lelokei Elokim. You have after that you have the Nishmas, and then you finish off the with the Yehalelucha without saying Yishtabach. We say Yishtabach Shimchel just like we say every morning in davening Yishtabach, or on Shabbos. So V'chein Yishtabach Shimchel An Makeno. So we end off with the Yishtabach.
We have the Nishmat Kol Chai just like you have for regular Shabbat davening, and you
after that
you get B'mikalot, V'chein Yishtabach, and then Yehalelucha, and then the bracha. It's as if you're saying from Nishmat all the way up to the Baruch on a regular Shabbat.
Right. But what you're saying is you also have Yehalelucha. We don't say Yehalelucha on Shabbos morning. On Pesach Seder, we say the Yehalelucha 3 paragraphs earlier. We have the Yehalelucha with no bracha at the end. Here, we say Yishtabach with the bracha at the end of everything, right before the fourth cup, we say the Yishtabach with a bracha at the end. What you're saying is you have Yishtabach and you have Yehalelucha. Both seem to have their own brachas.
Yishtabach doesn't have a bracha.
Your Yishtabach doesn't have a bracha.
Atakel, and then it goes to Yalucha Hashem, and then you have the brachot, and then you have the brachot.
Okay, so it's basically similar then. It's only one bracha at the end. You just don't do the Yishtabach bracha. You do the Halalucha bracha. So we do the Yishtabach bracha. So a slightly different nusach. It's basically the same idea that there's one bracha at the end. So Jeffrey, we're still going to try to find if there any Haggadah that has either 2 brachas or is neither bracha. That's what we'd like to find that you seem to have found. We'll have to look into that. Okay, let's just finish off a little more. So getting back to what we're learning here, we're in the middle of the Mishnah, and the Mishnah had said that you're supposed to follow the minhag Hamadina, the minhag of the place, and you're supposed to follow the minhag of the makom. And now that's the end of the Mishnah. Now comes the Gemara. The Gemara says, Hanu Rabbanan. The rabbis taught in a brisa. Be'emes amru. Be'emes amru is an interesting word, interesting term. Be'emes amru. Rashi says, whenever it says be'emes amru, truthfully they said, it means halacha. This is the halacha, and no one argues. Ein chilek b'davar. No one argues. This is the halacha. Be'emes amru. Truth be said. Ben mevarech liaviv. A child who's a youth, he's not a bar mitzvah yet, he can say the bracha of benching for his father and fulfill his father's obligation. As Rashi says, he's reached the age of chinuch, and he's chayev rabbinically in benching, and what would be the case where he could fulfill his father's obligation if his father is obligated in benching only on a rabbinic level? So then the child can fulfill the father's obligation because they're both obligated on the same level. How would that be that the father's only obligated rabbinically to bench? Normally, an adult is obligated biblically to bench. So Rashi says that the Gemara over there explains that if the father did not eat enough to be satisfied, he's not obligated biblically to bench. He's only obligated rabbinically. So the child is obligated rabbinically to bench, and the father is obligated rabbinically to bench because he ate a kazayas, the size of an olive. So it says the child could make a could say the benching for his father and fulfill his father's obligation. And the Eved Mevarech l'Rabbi, and a servant could actually fulfill his master's obligation. And this would obviously be applicable if the parent or the master doesn't know how to bench, but somehow the servant is going for his Geiros lessons and he knows how to bench, so he's going to be benching for his master. Yes.
But if he's not obligated and he benches, isn't that a bracha levatala?
So this is the thing. To say it's a bracha levatala benching, it is not exactly it's not exactly so. I mean, it's praising Hashem for the food. What would be wrong with that? So if you're talking about a guy, so the guy is not doesn't have a problem of brach levatala. He has a problem of maybe desecrating Hashem's name, but this would not be desecrating Hashem's name. A Jew, if it's a child, so it seems to be part of the mitzvah of chinuch and so on. Or if he's below chinuch, then it's also not a problem. But we're dealing with a child who's chinuch, and so he's obligated rabbinically to bench. But not biblically.
If a person had a mazonas and he only had a half of a kazayas, and he says alamichya, isn't that a bracha levatala?
Yeah,
because
that
he
would
didn't have enough.
Right, true. But you wouldn't call that moitzi shem sham. There would be a difference between that and just regular moitzi shem shamayim levatala. In other words, there's that seemingly would not be a biblical prohibition. It would be a rabbinic prohibition. But what you're asking is an interesting question. You're asking that the eved, the servant, is not obligated in benching. So would that be a problem? Or a woman is not obligated in benching. The child, we said, is obligated for chinuch. But here we're dealing with what about an eved or an isha? So how do you deal with that? And really, the question is a stronger question. You're asking for coming from an angle of it would seem that they're using Hashem's name in vain. But really, the question is, how are they obligated enough to be moitzi this other person? So that's really the question that has to be asked over here. The child, I understand, the child is obligated rabbinically, and the parent is now obligated rabbinically. Okay, fine. Well, what about a woman? Would she be obligated? So simple understanding is, yeah, a woman is obligated biblically. So there's no problem. And if a woman is obligated biblically, then an eved is obligated biblically. So basically, in other words, what it seems like is that an eved and an isha are no problem. There's no reason why there should be a problem. They're supposed to bench. They should be included. There is a discussion. There's a question about the woman because she's not obligated in a bris. So would that be some reason? But that maybe she's excluded from Neidel Lacha, where it mentions brischa shechasamta b'vsarenu. Maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow. But in any event, the simple understanding is that a woman and an eved would be obligated rabbinically, biblically, however you want to learn it. They're going to be obligated. But aval amru chachamim. But the rabbi said, Tavai me'era l'adam shishta v'anam barachim. However, the rabbi said, what an embarrassment! You didn't learn. What a curse should come to a person whose wife and the children are benching for them. So that's why I was commenting before, because
we've lived through times when it was really impossible for those people to study. And the ancient
Right.
time, also people have a very wrong impression of what Eved means, because they think about some lowly kind of situation, okay? And it's not true. In the ancient times, people were captured and they became avadim, and the truth was they were very well educated. And in different societies in the ancient world, those people were the special ones chosen to be the tutors.
We're talking about here an Eved who's an Eved Kanani, who's half partially converted to Judaism. We're not talking about a Jew that was a hostage. And it was we're not talking about a Tinok Shenishba. That's another. That you're talking about a Tinok Shenishba. That's another story. But you're right. There were cases. So what does it mean? Tavei me'era la'adam sheyesh devanav u'barchanai, that a curse should come. That the fact is that the person is obligated to. That there are certain areas in Torah where we sort of expect you to get yourself up to par. That we can't expect you to do everything, and to know everything, and to finish the whole shas. But there are certain things that you have to get up to par. And one of those is the laws of brachas. It says, go learn. You don't know, the suffix, if you don't know the bracha, you have to go learn. Another one is that benching, the Tavei Me'era, your wife and your children should not be benching for you. That's something you got to get, that's an important thing to start with. Anyway, my time is up. So to be continued tomorrow, Bez Hashem. Zay gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rebbe.
Thank you, Rabbi.